All right, today we're diving into a source that presents one of the most radical challenges you will likely ever encounter to the standard 13.8 billion year story of our universe. This is a really dense, complex argument, so let's just jump right in. Right out of the gate, the source puts all its cards on the table with this incredibly provocative statement. It's basically saying the entire debate isn't just a simple disagreement over data. No, it's framing it as a fundamental clash of worldviews. This quote right here is the lens for the entire argument. So to unpack all of this, we're going to follow the paper's roadmap. First, we'll look at its critique of modern cosmology. Then we'll examine the wild alternative it proposes as an anchor for history. And from there, we'll see how it reinterprets, well, pretty much everything, from fossils and dinosaurs to some major problems in physics. Okay, let's get into this first part. This is really the logical foundation for the whole thing. And it all starts by drawing a very sharp line in the sand between two different kinds of science. You see, the author makes this key distinction. On the one hand, you have operational science, things you can test in a lab over and over, like gravity. It's powerful, it's verifiable. But then you have historical science, trying to piece together the deep past. And the argument here is that this is a totally different ballgame. It's more like forensic detective work at a crime scene with no witnesses. You're just making inferences. And it all depends on assumptions about the past that, crucially, you can never actually prove. So here's the punchline. The paper argues that to make that 13.8 billion year timeline work, science has had to invent these placeholders for things we can't see or measure. The source calls things like dark matter and the inflation field secular miracles. Not discoveries, but necessary fictions. Kind of like cosmic duct tape, needed to patch the holes in the story whenever the data doesn't fit. Okay, so if you're going to challenge the very foundation of the standard model, what do you replace it with? Well, the source proposes its own anchor for history. And it's not a star or a rock layer. It's a specific recorded event rooted in a deep national tradition. Man, just listen to that description. The source isn't talking about some quiet spiritual moment. It's describing the revelation at Mount Sinai as a physical thermoacoustic event, a singularity that completely ruptured the laws of nature. The central claim here is that this was a public trauma, witnessed by millions, and it was so physically real, so extreme, that it permanently hardwired a nation's collective memory, becoming the unshakable bedrock of their entire tradition. And this event, according to the paper, leaves behind a timestamp, a number. But this isn't presented as some religious calculation or a belief. It's framed as a historical constant, meticulously maintained since that very moment at Sinai. So you're probably asking, how on earth do you maintain a precise timestamp for thousands of years? Well, the source calls it a forensic legal constant. And the logic is actually pretty fascinating. The idea is that for millennia, this date has been a legally required part of everyday documents. We're talking commercial contracts, divorce decrees, the whole shebang. If you got the date wrong, the contract was void. The system would break. So the claim is this number isn't just a story passed down, it's a high-precision signal locked in place by the continuous, unbroken, living legal machinery of a nation. All right, now let's see how this framework gets applied to geology. I mean, if you compress billions of years into less than 6,000, what do you do with the geologic column? How do you possibly explain the fossil record? The paper's answer is a mechanism it calls hydrodynamic sorting. So instead of layers of rock being laid down slowly, bit by bit over millions of years, it proposes a single high-energy global flood. In this model, the order of the fossils you see isn't a timeline of evolution. Nope. It's a map of where things lived and what their physical properties were, their density, their shape, their buoyancy, which determined how they got sorted and buried by these massive chaotic currents. And to back this up, the paper points to anomalies, evidence that just doesn't seem to fit the standard story. Take polystrate fossils. These are single tree trunks found standing upright, cutting vertically through multiple layers of rock that are supposed to represent millions of years. The author argues it's just physically impossible for a dead tree to stand there for eons while sediment slowly builds up around it. Instead, they claim this is the smoking gun, hard proof that those layers had to have been laid down all at once in a single, massive, catastrophic event. Okay, this brings us to the big one, probably the most iconic challenge for any short timeline model, the elephant in the room. Or maybe I should say, the T-Rex in the room. What about the dinosaurs? You know, the source knows this is the first thing you're going to ask, so it tackles the question head on. And its explanation is, Well, it's one of the most unique and provocative parts of the entire paper. So it pulls this concept from deep within Jewish tradition called kileim, which translates to forbidden mixtures. Now, the paper reframes this. It's not just some old agricultural rule about not mixing seeds, it's a prohibition against what it calls ancient genomic hacking. It paints a picture of a pre-flood world engaged in active bioterrorism, where the fundamental genetic firewalls between species were being deliberately broken down. And that leads to this stark comparison. The standard model says dinosaurs are our natural evolutionary ancestors. This paper says, no way. They were unnatural abominations, corrupted biological files. In this view, the fossil record isn't a beautiful diary of life's slow, steady progress. It's the recycle bin of history, a crash log of all the monstrous glitches that had to be intentionally wiped from the system. Okay, let's switch gears to physics for a second, because the paper has to deal with a colossal problem. If you squeeze billions of years' worth of radioactive decay into a short period, the heat released should be enough to literally vaporize the Earth. So, how do you get around that? Well, the core of the argument is to just reframe the entire problem. It suggests that this immense thermal energy wasn't just useless, destructive waste heat. No, it was the engine that powered a massive physical restructuring of the entire planet. That energy wasn't just released, it was consumed as work. And to show this is at least physically plausible, the paper offers 3 theoretical mechanisms. First, latent work, the idea that a ton of energy was just chemically absorbed or sucked up to fracture tectonic plates and form new kinds of rock. Second, neutrino shunting. Think of it like a cosmic safety valve. Accelerated decay releases its energy as harmless neutrinos that just pass right through the Earth, instead of as catastrophic heat. And third, something called the chameleon mechanism, which is a wild idea that physical constants could have changed locally, right here on Earth, while the rest of the universe, like our sun, stayed perfectly stable. And all of this brings us to the paper's final conclusion. It claims that when you strip everything away, the geology, the physics, the history, the debate isn't really science versus faith. It's about which unprovable starting point, which kind of miracle you're willing to accept. And this slide really lays out the ultimate choice the paper presents. On one side, you have the standard model's stochastic miracle, a universe just popping into existence from a lawless singularity by some mechanism we don't understand, gaining complexity over billions of random years. On the other side, you have the architectural miracle, a universe beginning in a state of maximum mature complexity through a single directed act. The author's point is that both models, at their very beginning, require an untestable, unobserved event you have to take on faith. So, in the end, the paper leaves us with this. It argues that any story about the deep past is just an inference, a story we project backward from where we stand today. And so the ultimate challenge it poses, really, is to you. What is the ultimate anchor for your reality? What starting point do you choose?